The newer generation in the workforce operates differently.
Mm-hmm.
And, I hear a lot of employees say they want to work the same way that they saw their parents work. They didn't
Yeah.
see loyalty from companies. And so they did not want to have that experience and want to have more control over their destiny. And so I think what we're seeing in the workplace today is kind of this crossroads, right? So you have senior leaders that have kind of worked their way up and paid their dues per se. And then you have a newer generation in and they want to engage differently. They want to know who you are. They want to feel that there's an authentic connection and they want to be mentored and they want to learn and grow, and it's a different rhythm. And so it's requiring leaders to connect in with the workforce differently.
Hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of Adeptus On-Air. I am again your host, Mike Hoffman, and today I am joined by a transformative force in the HR and recruitment field, Miss Tenia Davis. How you doing, Tenia?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. I appreciate you coming on and talking to us.
Thank you.
It's, I think nowadays with what's going on in the workforce, as a combination, I think, with the evolution, from COVID and hybrid and remote working environments and so forth, I think a lot of HR issues have that might have been ignored a little bit or kind of more in the forefront now, which I think's, a great thing. So I want to spend some time, talking about that later and kind of the evolution of everything. But you kind of just give everyone a little, biography briefly of your, experience in the field.
Sure. Let's see. I started my career as a techie, believe it or not. And I kind of fell into human resources. A project I was working on was extended, and they wanted to build an HR operation within the project. And so I was voluntold into the role, didn't know anything about HR at the time.
Yeah.
I just fell in love with it. I mean, there's so many different sides of human resources. There's the analytical side, there's the interpersonal side, and it touches the organization through so many different verticals. And I started in what was called personnel at the time.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
And I was programming information into DBase 3. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No, not specifically.
That's a throwback. And so I just kind of evolved and grew as the human resources function grew. And I've worked on the benefits side, the comp side, the recruiting side, the employee relations as a generalist, and just always intrigued how HR is really the backbone of organizations if it's done right.
Because it's funny because, as you hear certain buzz phrases and buzzwords in the industry, and not just in HR, but I'll call it in the business world, and we're an accounting firm, so you hear it here, it's we want to have the right work culture, or we want to maintain a proper balance of quality of life, and so forth like that. But I also remember, when I started out 20 years ago, not that your employers wanted to treat you poorly, but we never ever heard about those things.
Right.
I mean, sure, they did nice things for you, that kind of thing, but it wasn't because they had to maintain a work culture, and it wasn't because of this quality of life thing. So talk about kind of that evolution and how it became so much on the forefront of, people's minds.
Yeah, I think it's just we have different generations in the workplace, and they have different requirements and different needs. I grew up through corporate where, it was do as I say, and and it was very structured, and you had the hierarchy, and there was protocol. But I think as time has moved forward, the newer generation in the workforce operates differently, and I hear a lot of employees say they want to work the same way that they saw their parents work. They didn't see loyalty from companies. And so they did not want to have that experience and want to have more control over their destiny. And so I think what we're seeing in the workplace today is kind of this crossroads, right? So you have senior leaders that have kind of worked their way up and paid their dues per se. And then you have a newer generation in and they want to engage differently. They want to know who you are. They want to feel that there's an authentic connection and they want to be mentored and they want to learn and grow. And it's a different rhythm. And so it's requiring leaders to connect in with the workforce differently.
Yeah. And it's a struggle because you said, I think a lot of it, I'm probably using the wrong word, but it's somewhat generational. it's someone based on your own experience.
Yes.
And I guess my next question leading on to that is
And industry.
industry, sure, but I also think COVID.
Yes.
I gotta believe had a major impact on all this.
Oh yeah, so COVID was actually interesting. So I was one of the probably the few that had a great experience with COVID, which I didn't think I would do. I had always been more, I would say, worked extremely hard. So I saw my office probably more than I saw my family. And
Yeah.
COVID, I think, forced everyone to slow down,
Right.
right, and to reflect. Right, during COVID, I was in my home with my daughter. She was downstairs doing homework in high school, and I was upstairs working, and we
Yeah.
would meet in the kitchen for lunch.
Yeah.
And what I found is that, I was able to reconnect. I was also in school pursuing my PhD. Um,
Oh,
and
should I have called you doctor at the beginning?
oh, it's okay. Tania,
Michelle, you didn't tell me that. Oh, Michelle's in trouble now. Okay.
no. Tania is fine.
Let's start again.
No, really, no. And so, it was, I think, a moment for everyone to kind of just hit pause and and to really reassess what's important to you. Now, that's the upside. The downside is for some, it caused anxiety.
Yeah.
There was separation, concerns, and I think it just meant different depending on where people were in the phase of their time. But it also taught us that we can work from anywhere in the world.
Right. Which is good and bad. Because I think that
yeah.
goes back to your first point where, pre-COVID, a lot of companies are like, if you couldn't come in the office because you had, a repairman come into your house, you got to take a personal day.
Exactly.
Because how are you going to work at home? You can't, you won't, A, you won't be productive. B, we don't have a safe connection for you to connect and all that kind of stuff. Our firm was pretty ready. So we basically knew in like 48 hours, we were 100%, maybe even less, fully functional. And that's a credit to our IT department, but we were fully functional. But what it did was after that year passed, we never made it a requirement that people came in 5 days a week because as you, I'm sure, see on the recruiting side of HR, people are applying for jobs and we're seeing either in office, hybrid, or remote on everything we're seeing. So it's the workforce that is kind of dictating now. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm willing to interview for your company, but you got to right off the bat, you got to meet one of these demands.
Yeah. And I think that comes with a lot of complexities too. I agree with that. Right. I think where we had an opportunity to kind of blend, what is that right mix? Mm-hmm. I think people found that they could be more productive. So for, I live in the suburbs. I commute in, it's about an hour commute.
Yeah.
Can I use that hour to crank through my emails? Absolutely. Right. So I think people found that they can maximize their time differently and life is happening. I know, during that time, I had friends that were, caring for their parents or their children were having a hard time adjusting or, life happens and caring for a spouse with an ailment. So they were just, I'm sorry.
I said, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So all those different, it's like a collision of all these different things. Right. And then you're also looking at a different dynamics of a workforce. And so if you have a new employee start first time in a job and they start remotely, right? How do they connect in with their teams?
Yeah.
And how do they connect in with the organization you mentioned culture earlier. How do they understand the company norms and the company culture?
Yeah.
So that's where some of the disconnect came in as well.
Yeah.
And for a large percentage of employees, they did not want to go into the office. Some had anxiety. And then, I heard a lot of folks say too, they didn't miss the corporate politics, right? And so they were able to really just focus on the work. So I think you have a combination of all these different things that created a best case scenario to have remote workers.
Yeah, I mean, listen, talking to people here and just people I know in other companies, whether they're colleagues my age or younger people, friends of, my, adult child, things like that who are in the workforce,
right.
They're like, listen, the hour and a half I'm saving commuting, I can now work out in the morning.
Yes.
And I got to first get home at 7:00. I can now go to a yoga class in the morning and I just feel great the rest of the day because I got a workout in as opposed to, I got to be on a train at 7:00. Now I can, literally, if I have no calls, I can work out in my pajamas today, and things like that. So I do see from a quality of life standpoint, there are definitely benefits to people, not necessarily professionally, but outside the scope of work, working at home. I think it's a burden on an employer to an extent that you need to really understand and trust your employees. I mean, I have some employees here that I know they are so efficient and I know they're so dedicated that they're working, and they're working just as hard if they're there, because when they're here, I'm not checking on them because I don't need to check on them. So I don't need to check on them at home. The work product is of the same high quality. It's getting done just as quickly and efficiently and so forth. So if they're happy working at home, work at home.
I agree with that. I agree with that. It's interesting when I talk to my colleagues about this. Organizations that tend to be performance focused are able to manage a dispersed workforce a lot easier.
Yeah. Oh, I like that phrase, dispersed workforce. I like that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Organizations that have a higher premium on the socialization side struggle.
Yeah.
Because that's their culture, that's their connection, and that's their means of determining, the fluidity of how people move in the organization. And so I find that part very interesting, right? It's how organizations, and I think some organizations shifted during that time.
Yeah.
That were highly so, and it's nothing, one is not better than the other. It's just really how does the operation want to operate?
But right? I think a lot of the burden on that, well, I think the burden shifts both ways. From a management perspective, what this did enable me to do is it gave me a much bigger workforce to recruit from. Because, I have staff people in Colorado, in Texas, and I'm in Jersey. Okay. I would have never in a million years thought of interviewing those people pre-COVID. But now I can, and I've had people I've worked with for 3 years I haven't met yet.
Right.
I feel like I know them because I go out of my way when I need to call them. I try not to email them. I Teams them. So just like as I'm talking to you right now through a video call, I'm face-to-face with them.
Yes.
And sometimes I feel like I'm more face-to-face with those people than I am with some people in the office who will email me from 4 doors down.
Exactly. Or not interested in building a rapport with you, right? Yeah. I think it's so important. I do think the connection aspect is very important.
Yeah.
Because that's how you build trust. That's how you, determine how individuals, how you get feedback, even how you posture conversations, right? And that balancing act, but it takes a little bit of maturity as well.
Yeah,
within that interaction. But I've seen organizations thrive, just adapting extremely well from the COVID, and then I've seen some organizations struggle in the initial phase because they relied on the socialization.
Yeah,
and they had a higher premium, so.
Right.
They had to figure out what that was going to mean moving forward for them, right? But the performance focus, I've seen adapt faster because they tend to move, and it could have been the industry too. Some industries, thrive off of adaptability and innovation, and so they're able. That's just part of their rhythm. Whereas other organizations that move a little slower tend to, their evolution just has a different journey. And then one is not better than the other. It's just
different.
Yeah, it's just different.
Now, what about development, like staff development and taking on more management roles? Because this is something I've struggled with as well in my head, just trying to figure out the ways to make it effective. Someone moving through the ranks who's sitting here, to manage people, and then compare them to someone who might have the same skill set, but, is working out of their office in, the corner of their house, doesn't really necessarily have those same relationships. Have you found across all industries that a remote person might have a tougher time or have a longer journey to potentially hit a higher management role than someone who might be a traditional in-office worker?
I won't put a blanket statement on that. Yeah. I think industries are different. What I have seen is that earlier on, there was a rush to be a manager. I don't see that. I do see more skilled individuals wanting to be individual contributors. It is harder to be a manager today than years back. You have different complexities in the workplace. You have different social issues in the workplace, and it's a different interaction. But to answer your question, what I've seen is those that are able to have the most success, whether they're remote or in the office, have good communication skills and are able to build a rapport. If you're able to build a rapport and build the trust, whether it's via Zoom or in person, you're able to establish that relationship to manage the work and the team.
Yeah.
However, I have seen that because the workplace is so diverse, having some sort of in-person interaction does help build the relationship
Sure.
to get to the trust. I think if you do that up front, where I've seen folks have the most success is establishing that up front. If that's established up front, then it doesn't matter if you're remote, right?
Sure. No, agreed, 100%. It's much easier for me to work home on a Thursday now because I have this relationship with people as a manager and so forth. But to become a new manager, having not necessarily built that rapport, I think makes it more challenging. But you just made a great point I want to follow up on. You kind of said now people are maybe, and I know we can't make blanket statements, but what the hell, let's do it.
Okay.
But, when you said some people, right now aren't necessarily as interested in being managers, I was going to actually ask you a question similar to this. And you kind of hear these things. So the new generation, you want to call them Gen X, millennials, as we go through what we're all called baby boomers and so forth. The current generation that's graduating, college or not going to college, but entering the workforce.
Yes.
What are you finding more times than not blanket statement, are their objectives as they're entering the workforce?
So I won't make it a blanket statement, but what I've seen in terms of some consistent themes is their expectation of work and their expectation of the leader. So it's more so you are my manager, you're supposed to do this, you're supposed to do that, versus the engagement of interacting and also communication. And for some, it's really interesting. You could be in a meeting and you could say, hey, 4 or 5, 6, you do this, you do that, and here are the 3 things, and let's move forward. I do think that there is a language and communication style that works better for some. And it is more of an engaging, let me give you an example.
Yeah.
I was talking to someone and they mentioned they had a newly hired professional in the workforce 5 years. Right. The person wanted to be a manager the following year.
Yeah.
They considered themselves a subject matter expert in comparison to someone with over 20 years experience. So there's a little bit of, I think what the HR practitioners are saying, there's a little bit of a disconnect of how do I get to that next level and what does that next level mean?
Right.
And I think that's part of the challenge for organization is keeping folks engaged and also addressing, what a career path looks like in the workplace today.
Yeah.
Right. And what are the dynamics tied to that? Right.
And I think flexibility from a business is super important because you can have someone who could be a great worker, but they've hit their peak, meaning they're not going to be more than a manager or they're not going to be more than a senior. I'm just using kind of, levels here, but it could be whatever you want to call them, a controller at another business, whatever. But they're really good. They're really valuable to the team. But what happens is if they're at that level, every year they're going to want raises because they're entitled to them.
Right.
And now what happens is now you have someone, because of their longevity with the job and their loyalty to the company, is now in essence making so much more than that position would normally pay. So it's a balancing act. And I've had these discussions with clients as we're doing like projections and budgets and so forth. Like, am I going to kind of kill my budget by keeping someone at this level? But I know they can't do something else. Yeah. They're great at it. But I'm making this up, an $80,000 position, and they're up to 125 right now because they've been here 25 years.
And I've seen that picture as well. I've seen organizations that they had employees just kind of tap out per se, right? And what happens to the culture is even sometimes eroding because if people sit and they're unhappy, then they're disgruntled, right? Yes. And then you bring in new people that are impressionable, and then they become disgruntled, right? So now you have a culture of disgruntled individuals, right? So there's there's action and impact. And organizations that have kind of moved slowly and now are forced to move fast, it's even harder because there's no context for employees, right?
Yeah.
Now they feel like they're being pushed. And so I think organizations today are struggling with many things.
Yeah.
One, trying to compete. Two, having the right talent for how the organization wants to move forward.
Yeah.
And then having the right ingredients of leadership to cultivate a culture. And it's not one-sided. It's not one person. It's not HR's job. It's not just the leadership's job. It's an organization and building in that accountability.
Yeah.
And if there's a lack of accountability at all levels, then it tends to create problems down the road.
So I hate when you say stuff like that because I have 4 questions from that one statement. So I don't even know which way to go right now because you just said really good stuff. So I'm going to try and hit them all.
Okay.
My one question kind of spurns off of it is when you talked about obviously younger staff are impressionable. Mm-hmm. And I could not agree with you more. And I think having someone here might be a great worker, but might be getting stale, bored, whatever, and passing that on. Is asking someone who might be interested in going to a more remote position is hiding them from other staff a recommended or not necessarily recommended. Is that really an approach to be considered where it might not be something where they even interact with these people, but people just seeing someone in the office who's just looking miserable, but if you're confident they'd be just as efficient working at home, is hiding them a viable solution?
I don't think it's a good long-term strategy. I think it was important if you have, especially high potentials, you want to engage them right away. You want to build the rapport, the relationship, and the trust, because they're going to have many different informational conversations their way, and they will have to know how to navigate those.
Yeah.
So you do want to make sure that you prepare them to know how to navigate, because you can have a strong performer with the worst attitude, and that will demolish a team.
Agreed.
Right? We've all seen that picture. They're unhappy. They will automatically start pulling everybody that's unhappy with them. And then all of a sudden you have this cabal of unhappiness, and it doesn't matter. It just demolishes the team. And so it's better to pull those folks in, make sure you have a good rapport with them, make sure you understand, what is it that they want to achieve, and you have a good communicate. The most important thing is just have a good communication. So that as they are hearing these different things, and they're able to talk it through with you, and you're able to kind of help them navigate those different conversations. Because if you keep them all the way to the side, and then all of a sudden they're pulled into a conversation, they're like, oh, wow, what have I been missing?
Right. Yeah.
What happens? Oh, wow. And then all of a sudden you have no insight into what's taking place.
Yeah. I want to make one more point to that, and then I want to move to something else, which I know I definitely want to discuss with you before we wrap up, is I think what it comes down to is, management kind of has to decide in those situations. When I say management, HR, or the decision makers, whatever, term you want to use, for certain individuals, what's more important? Right. Meaning, is it the quality output I'm getting, but the potentially negative impact it's having on the culture, or potentially making a move on someone who is negatively impacting the culture, but now losing quality work and having to hope you find someone who can get those things done as efficiently and as productively, who's built a great rapport from a work product standpoint with either people internally or externally, depending on what your industry is.
And it can, and I want to make sure I cover it. It can also be the reverse, right? You can have someone with the best attitude.
Thank you. That was mostly my point. You just took my good point away.
That does not produce and is not healthy for the team, right?
Right. So but everyone loves them because they're
exactly.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Listen, I've worked with people over the years that offer to help. Let me help. What can I do to help you? What can I do to help you? Meanwhile, their own work's not done.
Yeah.
But they want to be the person that helps everyone. Meanwhile, okay, you just offered to help me, but what about those 4 things someone else gave you last week?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen that too. And typically a leader builds trust by what you deliver. Right. And so, if nothing is delivered or even a product to start saying, hey, you do this well, or we need to focus on this. it kind of dwindles down. And then
Yeah.
I've seen that, right? Well, what else can I do? Well, we need to get to these other two things
Yeah.
first,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Or
Agreed.
if I call it more of the delusion of talent, but and I've seen where people feel they're the expert of everything,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and so they don't know how to work to the strength of the team,
Yeah. No,
right?
agreed.
And that's not a good mix either. And so it's I always say play to the strength of your team
Yeah.
and develop where everybody needs development, but identify the development, but play to the strength of the team. And it also helps with the work immersion and to making sure that all points are
Yeah.
connected in.
I think what this comes down to also, which is leading me to my final point I want to mention to you. So I think you'll like the segue. If you don't, just pretend that you do.
Okay.
Is I think managers can always learn more and can always develop. And what I'm finding now is I'm getting later on in my career in management and so forth, that I think there's a lot of great books out there that people can kind of read to kind of not necessarily change their management style, but just give them some certain things to think about in terms of either how to be a better manager, or maybe just how to communicate maybe differently when certain situations arise.
Yes. Yes.
Leading me, hence the segue, you've written 2 books.
Yes.
This is the part I told you you'd probably like.
Okay.
So one's called The Feedback Blueprint, Unlocking the Power of Constructive Insights. But then the other one, just from the title alone that intrigues me, is 8 Essential Steps to Inspire Others and Building Thriving Workforce. Because I think if you asked me what the list of managers have many functions, but if you said to me, what do you think is the most important or one of the most important functions of a manager? I think if it was me, instinctively, I'm going to use a lot of those words. I would have maybe said motivate, but inspire to me is the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of your jobs is to motivate and inspire your staff to want to continue to develop and be the best they can be.
Right.
So kind of talk briefly about that book. Let's not get into all 8 essential steps. We'll be here for another year and a half, but just talk to me about generally the concept of that book and so forth.
Yeah. So the concept is around servant leadership. And I kind of weaved in different stories that align to that philosophy. And servant leadership is really a lot of what you describe, as well as really understanding the nuances of your team and helping them to develop in a way that is productive for the organization and where they feel that they have some sort of career trajectory. That's it in a nutshell. And servant leaders, it's a selfless way of leading. It's not about the leader themselves, right? It's about the team,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, I do see it as a shift. And I've worked in servant leadership-led organizations, and I've seen how it just meshes all through everything. Yeah. It becomes part of the DNA of the organization. And then I've seen other organizations where it's fight or flight. And, I've seen the impact of that as well. So that's servant leadership. And so the book is all about how to develop those skills
Mm-hmm.
to cultivate and lead, inspire, all the things you just mentioned, as well as develop the team, right? And how do you build those connection points? And how do you have awareness around your own leadership style? And the feedback blueprint, I took the biggest pain that I've seen in organizations throughout my career. I have not met an organization that likes performance reviews.
Oh, we're going through them right now. I get it.
Right. And
Michelle, be nice to me. I have to write yours this week.
Oh, wow. Well, here's the thing. Nobody likes giving feedback. Yeah. However, it's the most critical aspect in an organization, right? Because I think in avoiding giving feedback, what I've seen, it makes it harder for that employee because once they start receiving feedback, it then becomes combative. I've never been told that. What do you mean I'm not organized? Of course. Yeah. And so the feedback is just basically an expansion of the constructive insight model on basically focus on the behavior, provide examples, and be very clear about the expectations and in the moment so that, no one should have to wait 12 months to get feedback.
Well, that's the thing is, I'm a firm believer if someone is generally surprised by negative comments on a review, then that's the shame on the managers for not communicating that in the 12 months since the last review.
Yes.
So a review should really be summarizing the feedback you've kind of gotten during the year and maybe making suggestions on goals
Right.
moving forward. What infuriates me when I review other people's reviews before they're disseminated out to the staff is, besides the comment section, which obviously is the most important, not necessarily the numbers, but let's face it, a lot of people care about the numbers they get.
Yes.
But it's just the reality. You try changing that, you just can't.
Right.
It infuriates me when someone did a review and they'll just take their pen and they'll just circle all the force.
Yeah.
I mean, can you at least pretend you're putting effort into this? And at least, but that kind of infuriates me and so forth. But I also think a review, forgetting the comments for a second, the fact that you took the time to write things and that you are looking at each category. And, to me, it also shows the staff that management cared enough to take the time to do this.
Yes.
And the ones that I see where it's all circled like that and under comments, good job.
Yes.
That's not a review. That's a HR requirement form that you're filling out. You're not giving a review because you're providing absolutely zero feedback. And by the way, feedback doesn't have to be negative. Like you just said.
Exactly.
Positive feedback's great. Really love how you handle those clients. Thanks for bailing us out when, Jack got sick. You really stepped up into roles that you weren't comfortable with. Continue to expand your knowledge. Love how you wanted to develop a skill in this that no one else wanted to do. You can make those things positive, and it's okay to then put in not negative, but constructive feedback on areas that they can improve on. I mean, I think it's all how you present things. I can say the same thing two different ways.
And I get it. I think leaders, what I hear leaders say is that they're polarized because they don't know what to say in this current environment. They don't know what to say. And so they don't say anything, right? They don't want to offend. And then they sometimes might second guess how they say it. I had one leader, this is really companies ago, just avoid it altogether.
Yeah.
Because the one time she gave feedback, the employee was just horrified, had never received feedback before. And so the employee made it personal when the leader was just basically trying to give her feedback on a project she had worked on. And so I see it actually becoming more and more and more of a concern for leaders, whereas the example that I gave you was, 5 years back. But I would hear about those comments ever so often, but now I hear it a lot. Leaders are, when I talk to my peers, they're saying the same thing. Leaders don't want to get feedback. It's different generations. They communicate differently. They hear differently. And it's one part of leadership that some leaders would just rather avoid. So I wrote the book kind of with a very simple roadmap tool. So whatever chapter someone picks up, they can take it and run with it and have the tools to use. Yeah. And that's the most important aspect.
Perfect way to end this. So where can you get your books? Amazon or?
Amazon.
All right. So I assume my autographed copy is coming in the mail?
There you go. Yes, I will send you.
Listen, I really enjoyed this. Like, as you can tell, it's something I think about quite often, this aspect. So it was really good to kind of get an opinion from, someone super, super qualified in the area. So besides your books, how can people find you across social media platforms?
So I'm on Instagram, The Leadership Wise. My website, The Leadership Wise, make it really easy. And then Tenia Davis on LinkedIn.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Well, Doctor, I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure talking to you, and I wish you nothing but continued success.
Oh, thank you. Same to you.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks for listening to Adeptus On-Air. If you like this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. The views and opinions by the podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Adeptus. This podcast provides general information only and is not intended to constitute advice.